For nearly 4 decades, one of music's most beloved voices carried a secret that could have destroyed everything. To the world, he was gentle, honest, vulnerable. His songs spoke of pain, healing, and truth. He helped millions confront their darkest emotions through music. He became a symbol of emotional authenticity. But behind the scenes, his own life was unraveling in ways no one could see. There was a second apartment. There was another woman. And there was a confession so devastating, it didn't just break trust, it put his wife's health at risk. For 40 years, he said nothing. Then, at 72 years old, he finally admitted the truth. And what he revealed forced everyone to reconsider the man they thought they knew. This is the story of how James Taylor, the voice of emotional honesty, lived a life shaped by secrets, addiction, love, and regret. James Vernon Taylor was born into a world of privilege and expectation on March 12, 1948, in Boston, Massachusetts. His father was a respected physician. His mother was a trained opera singer with deep artistic roots. From the outside, his family looked perfect, educated, talented, and secure. But perfection can hide fractures no one talks about. When James was just 3 years old, his family moved to North Carolina, settling into a quiet, wooded area near Chapel Hill. The environment was peaceful, almost isolated. It was beautiful, but it was also lonely. Loneliness would become one of the defining forces of his life. His mother filled the house with music. Every child was expected to learn an instrument. Music wasn't optional, it was part of survival. James started with the cello, but something inside him gravitated toward the guitar. By his early teens, he wasn't just playing music, he was using it to process emotions he didn't fully understand. But while music gave him an outlet, it couldn't protect him from what was happening inside. By age 16, everything began to collapse. He fell into a deep depression. He stopped functioning normally. He slept for long stretches, disconnected from reality. His grades dropped. His motivation disappeared. Eventually, the darkness became so overwhelming that he made a decision few teenagers ever make on their own. He admitted himself into a psychiatric hospital. He stayed there for 9 months. 9 months of isolation. 9 months of medication. 9 months of confronting a mind that felt like it was working against him. At an age when most young people were planning their futures, James was simply trying to survive. When he finally left the hospital, he didn't feel healed. He felt fragile, lost, but he also felt one thing more strongly than ever before. He needed music. He moved to New York City with almost nothing. No stability, no safety net, just a guitar and a desperate need to find meaning. The city was chaotic and unforgiving. He played in small clubs and coffee houses, barely earning enough money to survive. He met other musicians chasing similar dreams, many of whom were also battling their own demons. It was during this time that he encountered heroin. He would later describe that moment with chilling honesty. He said, once opiates entered his life, everything changed. Addiction didn't arrive slowly. It consumed him quickly. It filled the emotional void, numbed the pain, and created a temporary illusion of peace. But it came at a cost. His career stalled before it could begin. His health deteriorated. His relationships fractured. He wasn't building a future. He was barely holding on to the present. Desperate for a second chance, he traveled to London in the late 1960s. He had no guarantee of success, no certainty of survival. But something unexpected happened. His demo recordings reached the hands of people who recognized his talent. Soon, he found himself auditioning in front of some of the most influential musicians in the world. They listened quietly, and they believed in him. He became the first American artist signed to Apple Records. It should have been the beginning of everything. But addiction doesn't disappear just because success arrives. Behind the opportunity, his struggles continued. He was hospitalized again. He couldn't fully promote his own music. His career teetered on the edge of disappearing before it even truly began. But then something changed. In 1970, he released a song that would alter the course of his life forever. Fire and Rain. It wasn't just a song. It was a confession. It spoke openly about depression, loss, and addiction in a way popular music rarely had before. Listeners didn't just hear it, they felt it. The song climbed the charts. Millions connected with its honesty. Almost overnight, James Taylor became a star. But fame didn't erase his inner battles. If anything, it complicated them. In 1971, his life took another unexpected turn when he met Carly Simon. She was already successful, talented, and admired. When they met backstage at a concert in Los Angeles, the connection was immediate. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty. They were drawn to each other instantly. Their relationship moved quickly. Within a year, they were married. To the public, they became music's golden couple. They were beautiful, successful, creative. Their lives looked like a fairy tale. They performed together. They supported each other's careers. They built a family. But fairy tales rarely show what happens behind closed doors. Because even as their public image grew stronger, private cracks were already forming. James was still fighting addiction. And addiction doesn't just affect the person suffering from it. It affects everyone around them. Carly later described feeling like she was slowly losing the man she loved. He wasn't always present emotionally. Sometimes he felt distant, unreachable, even when he was physically there. But there was something else she didn't know. Something hidden just blocks away from their home. A second apartment. At first, he explained it as a creative space. A quiet place to work without distractions. She wanted to believe him. So she did. But the truth was far more complicated. Inside that apartment, James was living a separate life. There was another woman. Her name was Evie. That apartment became a boundary between two realities. In one, he was a husband and father. In the other, he was someone else entirely. For Carly, the discovery wasn't just painful. It was disorienting. It forced her to question everything she thought she understood about her marriage. But the most devastating moment was still to come. One day, James told her something that changed everything. He needed to be tested for sexually transmitted diseases. The words hung in the air, heavy and irreversible. This wasn't just an admission of betrayal. It was an admission that he had placed her at risk. The emotional damage was immediate and permanent. Trust doesn't break cleanly. It shatters. And once shattered, it never returns to its original form. Addiction continued to shape his life in ways neither of them could control. There were moments Carly witnessed that stayed with her forever. She saw him inject heroin. She watched the man she loved disappear into someone she barely recognized. Addiction stripped away his emotional availability. It created distance where there had once been intimacy. He wasn't choosing to hurt her, but he couldn't stop hurting himself. Their marriage became a cycle of hope and disappointment, love and loss, connection and separation. Eventually, the weight became too heavy to carry. After nearly a decade together, they separated. Their divorce was finalized in 1983. To the outside world, it marked the end of a relationship, but emotionally, it left scars that never fully healed. For James, recovery was not immediate. Addiction had been part of his life for nearly 2 decades. It wasn't just a habit. It was intertwined with his identity, his coping mechanisms, and his emotional survival. He entered treatment programs. He relapsed. He tried again. Recovery wasn't a straight line. It was a battlefield. He later described addiction as something that takes you away from your own life. It disconnects you from the people you love. It makes you unreliable, unavailable, even when you care deeply, even when you want to be present. He eventually found stability, remarried, and built a quieter life. He continued making music, continued performing, continued being admired by millions. To the public, he had survived. He had overcome his demons. But some truths remained unspoken. Until 2020, at 72 years old, James finally confronted his past publicly with complete honesty. He admitted that heroin had controlled his life for 20 years. 20 years. 2 decades of emotional absence. 2 decades of internal chaos. 2 decades of decisions shaped by addiction. He admitted he had failed as a partner. He admitted he had been emotionally unavailable. He admitted he had hurt the people who loved him most. There was no attempt to excuse it, only acceptance, only truth. For Carly, the pain never fully disappeared. Years later, she still described him as the great love of her life. Despite everything, despite the betrayal, despite the distance, love, she realized, doesn't always disappear when a relationship ends. Sometimes it simply changes form. Sometimes it becomes memory. Sometimes it becomes understanding. And sometimes it becomes a lesson about the limits of what love alone can fix. James Taylor's voice helped millions confront their own pain. But behind that voice was a man fighting battles no audience could see. He created music that felt honest because it came from lived experience. Depression, addiction, loss, regret, and ultimately survival. His life was not the perfect story people imagined. It was complicated, messy, human. He wasn't just a man who wrote beautiful songs. He was the man who lived through the pain those songs came from. And in the end, his greatest act of honesty wasn't in his music. It was in finally telling the truth about who he had been. Because sometimes the hardest thing a person can do isn't surviving the darkness. It's admitting it was there all along.